Science fiction has often been reproached, and not without reason, for skewing a view of the universe toward a humanoid, that's not to say human, form. Star Trek doubled down on not tripling the special effects budget when it introduced, in The Chase, its version of a great directed panspermia to explain any interspecies resemblances beyond the pointy ears and the odd antennae. If anthropomorphism predominates, then it's because it predates the anthropic by a few billion years, i.e. they don't look human, humans don't look human, they look like a progenitor. However, in spite of the outward preponderance of bipedalism and variations on a familiar visage, Trek has tried and succeeded over the decades with the means at its disposal to diversify the range of extraterrestrials on offer. One such effort at difference and differentiation was the inclusion of all manner of things shapeshifting, beginning, in theory, in the first ever episode of Star Trek to be broadcast, The Man-Trap. A salt vampire might well be a shapeshifter on a technicality, but it's one you'd be wise not to argue whilst you're on the other end of those suckers. Most recently, we got the news that one species of shapeshifter in particular would soon be making a return to the franchise after an absence of more than 30 years. We couldn't help but wonder, therefore, about all the other changers of form out there in galactic Trek history. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 11 shapeshifting aliens that we know about. Number 11. Changelings. Let's start with the most memorably morphogenic, shall we? It all began, for the most alpha and beta quadrants anyway, with unknown sample, or more literally, nothing, in the Denorius belt. Etal was eventually dropped from the label, but Odo remained none the wiser for the longest time as to his origins. Eventually, of course, Odo found his people, but, echoing Sisko and Homefront, there were times he wished he never had. As we all now know, aside from Odo and the other 99, luft balloons if they wanted, the Changelings, first referred to as such in Vortex, were also the founders of the Ruthless Dominion. With a name like that, they weren't going to be much else. These were goo people, in Captain Shaw's colourful phraseology. Not far off in their natural state, the Changelings were basically some sort of shimmering gelatinous liquid. Though they could exist as discrete entities, they also formed a collective whole in the infamous Great Link. As individuals, whether trying to rule the galaxy or just apply the rule of law, it was through the magic of these morphogenic enzymes in their morphogenic matrix that the Changelings would assume just about any form they wanted. As a species, they didn't eat, sleep, excrete, or have sex unless they were trying out the curious thing the solids do. All that, and they were probably immortal, or timeless if you prefer. Number 10. Rogue Changelings. Holding onto your anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, as the saying goes, but you can hardly blame this offshoot of the Great Link for bearing a grudge. The founders started it, but Section 31, with the agreement of the Federation Council, did some mass biological poisoning of their own in a genocidal attempt to stop it. And then there was Project Proteus, Section 31's next wartime crime. Begun as a series of experiments on captured changelings at Daystrom Station in order to create a band of super spies, the result wasn't extra effective espionage, but Vadic with a vengeance, reborn with some rather scary new abilities that she could then, upon escape from Daystrom, pass on to any changeling wanting to join her breakaway cause of the death of the Federation, hand in assimilated hand with what was left of the Borg. Let's have a look at Dr. Crusher's autopsy report on the dead changelings still in the form of Ensign Sidney LaForge on the Titan A for a better idea of Vadic's Section 31, Thalomium 847 given capabilities. The subject has been able to completely replicate internal human organs, only under intense dissection does the tissue revert to its natural state. Such perfect replication also included the person's blood plasma, along with the post-mortem retention of form that meant these changelings could pass the standard blood screening tests, although those never seemed to be much of a hindrance for the founders in the first place. No need for concern, however, Admiral Crusher found a workaround. Number 9. Silver Blood. These Delta Quadrant curiosities could arguably be better described as shape takers, not shape shifters. In any case, duplicating a person so perfectly down to individual memories of Indiana, and other words, such that even they forget they are a copy, is more than good enough to count here. Deuterium, hydrogen sulfate, dichromates, and a dash of protein molecules is not the unseasoned recipe for Neelix's soup, but the biochemical composition of the biomimetic lifeform encountered by Voyager, itself in dire need of deuterium for fuel. Biomimesis might sound fun until you get it all up in your spacesuit or on your thumb, though the former, for Harry Kim, was surely preferable to pedaling home in the mess hall. Volunteering himself and good buddy Tom for a trip to the surface of the Class Y, the ever-eager Ensign and Lieutenant Paris became the first to be reproduced by the rather poetically named Silver Blood. All that was then needed to duplicate the rest of the crew was samples of their DNA, at least partial evidence that humans, and every alien species present on Voyager, possessed a highly specific form of genetic memory. Another shapeshifter of sorts from the Alpha Quadrant had had previously demonstrated this capacity in humans, the Lysarian desert larvae and its mimetic symbiont. As for the silver blood copies from Voyager, they were destined not to be remembered at all. Number 8. Elasomorphs. Let's take a dive into the Galactic Zoological Catalogue for a moment. Dr. Pulaski had read at least part of the entries under A of that never before and never after mentioned work, as from it she was able to inform Captain Picard and a semi-impressed Mr. Worf of a species called Elasomorph, which is supposed to possess the power to alter their molecular structure into other life forms. The dolphin was the first, and clip show aside, pretty much last appearance of this particular set of shapeshifters. After all, calling up Starfleet as their own personal taxi service every 5 minutes, then moaning about the trip conditions was probably not the best way to ingratiate themselves to the Federation. Dadan wanted to kill poor Hennessy just because there was an infinitesimal chance he might infect their precious protege princess. Salia, the titular dolphin, and Anya, her governess, having taken on humanoid and or bug-eyed monster form, were on their way back to home planet of Daled 4, a tidally locked world with a 1-to-1 synchronous rotation. Both sides of Daled 4 were inhabited. The planet's unusually dense troposphere presumably prevented anyone from cooking to death on the permanently sunny half. Moreover, in their natural state, the elasomorphs, though apparently made of molecules, looked more like they were beings of pure energy anyway. In spite of the lengthy civil war between the two halves of the planet, elasomorph civilization was clearly also highly advanced. Their system of communication used a terawatt power source, which was itself more powerful than the entire Enterprise D could generate. Number 7. Vandorians. To be fair to Lieutenant Levy, it's not a conspiracy theory if you're right. The Vandorians were lurking around far more corners than certainly Boimler thought, but who knows, maybe we're all taking part in a giant morality test without knowing it. Analogous to elasomorphs, the Vandorians could, as Spock once put it, rearrange their molecular structure into anything with the same general size and mass. In their untransformed state, they were not the amorphous blob we would later become more accustomed to where shapeshifters were concerned. No, they kind of look more like a squid. We first met a member of the species when one came aboard the Enterprise in the form of legendary space trader Carter Winston in the animated series episode The Survivor. At that point in history, few people had ever seen a Vandorian. Spock says that the Vandorians' practice of deceit as a way of life puts them off limits, and as such their homeworld, Vendor, was quarantined. It should, however, be noted that the Vandorian impersonating Carter Winston actually tended to the real McCoy for a year before his death, so even the giant squid has a giant heart. Number 6. Coalescent organisms. Whereas Odo used a canine disguise so he could arrest Quark, Geordi's phony pooch pal in Aquil had altogether less lawful intentions. Luckily for him, Geordi kept a phaser in his quarters. Coalescent organisms could be described as having similar properties to the later introduced silver blood. They also bore a more than passing resemblance to the Changelings. This is going to sound very far-fetched, Dr. Crusher noted in sickbay over her replicated hand. Crusher went on to explain that in microscopic form, the coalescent organisms absorb and then become the organisms they've absorbed right down to the cellular level. On a macro scale, poor Lieutenant Roca had been eaten as such before his transfer to the relay station. Then, having failed to repeat the process with Lieutenant Aquil, when the time came, the coalescent coalesced into Mora, her dog. We'd say be a cat person, but they can be shapeshifters too.
This one goes out to all the people that look at our videos and say, I can totally do that. Prove it. We have finally burnt both Chris and Tom completely through. They imploded with the sheer force of their own awesomeness and the amount of crap that we send them every week. So, we're looking for new editors. These are people who will, frankly, be able to look at me for a long period of time and not vomit. Get in touch by sending your CV, a cover letter, and a show reel to the email address that you're looking at on the screen right now. I very much look forward to working with you. I very much look forward to seeing you cry with incredible frustration as to why Sean just can't get the lines right. You are deadly. I can't wait to work with you. Do get in touch, fire your application in now, and the very best of luck. Thanks very much, folks.
Number 5. Wraith. The Wraith in Star Trek are telepathic shapeshifters with a penchant for poetry. One particular Wraith on the rogue planet appeared to Captain Archer in the guise of the mental image he'd formed as a child of the elusive woman from The Song of Wandering Angus by W.B. Yeats. It wasn't a little silver trout, however, that had become a glimmering girl, but a sort of giant violet-tinged sentient slug, made of cells capable of entering a state of chromosomal flux. I'm sure all of that was in the first draft of Yeats' poem. Wraith was also, in fact, a term used by the Eska, a humanoid species not even from from the rogue planet they had named Dakala, but come in groups to hunt the life forms there all the same. The Wraith, as shapeshifters, could transform into an array of objects, inanimate and animate. "We can become whatever you see, a tree, an animal, water, whatever you see," said the slug lady to Archer after they'd both stopped wandering. Number 4. The Nascene. You can't play the banjo or torture a bunch of the crew if you're still a translucent goo. Caretaker was more of a misnomer, and Suspiria was, by definition, the crew's last gasp at getting back the way they came. In the end, thanks to these shapeshifters, Sporocystian would be the word of the day for the next 7 years on Voyager. The Nascene were a highly advanced species who hailed from another galaxy and were possibly native to subspace. Ordinarily, the Nascene existed as a purple, semi-transparent liquid, with or without tentacles, but could take on humanoid form. Unlike for changelings, humanoid Sporocystian procreation might have been possible too, provided a compatible biomolecular pattern. Upon death, the Nascene, at least the caretaker anyway, shrunk down to solid crystals small enough to be stored in a medical cupboard. The remains could then double up as a compass to point to other living members of the species, just so long as you happen to have a hexy-prismatic field to hand. Number 3. Species 8472. At least when Species 8472 came out swinging its scorpion, you knew you were, Harry knew he was, f***ed almost immediately. Without microcellular scans, the AirSat's Ensign Gentry in the flesh was indistinguishable from a real human being. 8472's ability to drop their habitual Borg number plate and adopt the form of other species, and a good number from the Alpha Quadrant in fact, was not natural per se, but then not completely beyond their nature either. Indeed, it took some highly sophisticated genetic engineering and a lot of isomorphic injections for Valerie Archer, no relation, or was there, to go on that date with Jason Hayek. However, Species 8472 achieved it, the result was the same, for reconnaissance purposes, of course. That. Number 2. Shapely honorables, shifty dishonorables. There have been far more than 10 shapeshiftables in Star Trek in the now near 60 years, so as to avoid yet another interstellar brouhaha with one or another of them, we thought it best to add an extra entry to detail just as many of these uniquely capable aliens as possible. Oh, and sorry to the Dowd, you just missed out once again. Mentioned in the introduction, everyone thought the salt vampire has sucked its last bit of sodium chloride until we, and especially Commander Ransom, found out the truth in Veritas of Star Trek Lower Decks. The salt vampire, or salt succubus in Beckett Mariner's word, was comparable to the Telosians and the Rigelian hypnoids, i.e. that pink, that wasn't in the animated series thing from Mud's Passion. Speaking of passion, there was Ronan, the shapeshifting sex ghost, more properly an anaphasic life form that could assume a humanoid appearance. Similar, though less lascivious, if occasionally murderous, beings included Redjack and the Organians. The Q, whether they'd like it or not, no doubt also count in the same category as non-corporeals, taking on corporeal or other form. We've already mentioned the dogs, so let's not forget Gary Seven's cat. There's also the genetically modified Sulabon, the Davidians with a taste for 19th century humans, and plenty more. Even humans could learn how to shapeshift by a process of cellular metamorphosis, as Garth of Izar aptly demonstrated in Whom Gods Destroy. And now, before we have to revert back to our liquid state, as one final shapeshifter we must consider. Number 1. Comaloids. They might sound like something you'd only whisper to your pharmacist, but comaloids are no myth, and that's for sure. And for the first time since 1991, a comaloid is coming back, assuming, as seems sensible, that her former Emperorness Philippa Georgiou landed back after 2293, it most definitely can't be the same comaloid either, unless the species is resistant to total vaporization by Klingon Disruptor after all. The eyes had it in the teaser trailer for Section 31 shown for the first time at San Diego Comic-Con this year. Not somehow some kind of Soong-type android, but indeed one of those shapeshifters from Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country, to be played this time by Sam Richardson, actor and lifelong Trek fan. Richardson knows his stuff, therefore, but it's not like he has much to work with on the species. Before her death, the one and only Martia before him spent most of her time trying to flatter Captain Kirk's rather large ego into a murder plot escape ruse on Rura Penthe. We do know that Martia's initial appearance was not the comaloid's true form, but merely a pleasing shape, and that they could take on a variety of bodily configurations, including tall male alien, tiny child, and Kirk himself. I know it's a trope, but just shoot them both. It would also seem that comaloids retain the same yellow eye colour no matter the humanoid form they change into. So there's your Achilles heel. For we assume Section 31 hoping to gain an advantage with this particular operative. Either that or there's a booming market for comaloid contact lenses. That's everything for our list today, folks. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed, and if there's any we missed, please let us know in the comments below. Thank you very much to Jack for writing the article which this is based. You are awesome, you are wonderful, live long and prosper, go out and drink some water, you're a legend. Thank you very much.